Everyone, welcome for a very special episode today where we are going to dive into a hot industry topic. Vogue has been doing this 4-day series of global conversations with industry leaders from around the world like Virgil Abloh, Stella McCartney, and Marc Jacobs about pressing topics that relate to the fashion industry. So one of the more recent conversations that they've had was about the future of fashion shows, and which I am so excited to continue on the conversation that Vogue started with one of my dear friends, Bronson Vajda, and he is an agent at one of the world's renowned modeling agencies. So I'm excited to introduce you guys to Bronson. Given the fact that this is actually my first time doing a Zoom recorded call, we're just going to adjust and see when Bronson is able to join us, and then we will go ahead and get the conversation started. Hey, Bronson, how are you?
Are we in?
Yeah, we're in. How you doing?
Awesome. I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited to chat with you.
Of course. You look awesome as always.
Hey, and vice versa. You're literally the king of minimalism. I literally took all my outfits down, so I appreciate you being here kind of in full glory.
Cool. Let's do it.
All right, so we're just going to jump right on in. I already kind of prefaced everyone that we're going to be continuing the conversation that Vogue started with the future of fashion shows. And just so a little bit more about Bronson, everyone, he originally started his career in New York City with internships at a boutique modeling agency handling social media and other projects surrounding New York Fashion Week. Since then, he's done contract work as a casting director for brands like John Elliott before moving into assistant creative director roles and becoming an agent that he currently is at the world's leading modeling agency, Wilhelmina. So I'm very excited to chat with you today about the future of fashion shows because you are really in the weeds, so to speak, with models and how fashion shows currently operate. And now, given the fact that we're all kind of in quarantine, can formulate ideas as to how your industry in particular will be impacted as it relates to fashion shows in particular. So to kick off the conversation, one of the main topics that was talked about in the Vogue conversation was who is the audience of a fashion show. Traditionally speaking, a fashion show is when people gather around in the physical world to view a collection that a designer puts down the runway, and then you're able to buy the collections afterwards in a market week, which is normally the week after Fashion Week, where different retailers are able to go in and buy collections and place orders wholesale to then get delivered to their stores and then have consumers buy online. So one of the interesting things that they talked about in this discussion was that we're now seeing a split in fashion shows as just being something known as a physical experience to one that's also virtual. Balenciaga and Chloe were on the call in which Balenciaga was saying that they host normally 600 individuals for the physical experience, but have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of viewers on YouTube and Instagram and Twitter who are looking at the shows and discussing the garments themselves. So it goes to show that there is a huge virtual audience that expands beyond the 600 seats that they have in the room. And Chloe also weighed in on this, saying that these physical fashion shows have such importance to them because it's such a beautiful moment of bringing people together and have that physical experience that isn't emitted the same way when consumed virtually. So my first question to you, Bronson, is given the fact that we live in this really connected era of inclusivity through technology, where do you think there is room for growth in the traditional fashion show model to incorporate the use and application of technology?
So this is a huge question. I mean, I think everybody is trying to wrap their head around this as we come to as a community to kind of figure out, where we should go from here. I think that, technology is, of course, going to play a larger role than we've ever expected. As Balenciaga was saying, they said they host about 600 people in their audience, and that can include everyone from, editors to buyers to stylists, photographers, influencers, of course. But now you're seeing that more people want to be involved. I mean, the numbers through YouTube, Instagram Live, other platforms is amazing. I mean, the amount of people that want to be involved. I think what's going to happen is brands are going to have to listen to that community, because that 600 compared to a million, I mean,
Mm.
there's so many great ideas that can be involved in that. And I think that these large brands, I mean, large or small, anybody involved in a fashion week is going to have to listen to the consumer first and really make a point of that. I mean, we say it to say it, I feel,
Mm.
but people really have to be in tune with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think not only listening to consumers, but finding a way to communicate them in a way that feels not only authentic in terms of tone of voice, but authentic in terms of the way in which that conversation is held. So like you were saying with Instagram Live and Facebook Live, like these are real-time moments that people are able to interact with the brand directly, have their questions answered, and kind of allows room for a new audience member, so to speak. Another
Right.
thing that Balmain weighed in on this conversation was that, originally when you would have these physical fashion shows, people would physically clap to show emotion about how they felt about the collection. And now with things like Twitter and YouTube, you're able to see so many different points of interaction where someone will be like virtually applauding the collection at the end or sending heart emojis. So there's different ways of interpreting the audience's response to the collection that isn't in a traditional way, like a physical clap, or necessarily even a lot of interest from the press out the gates. It can be so much more than just these traditional institutions absorbing what happens at these fashion shows, but more importantly, almost like the conversation that happens after them in this community, as well as
Right.
simultaneously when.
Well, I think especially with technology, you can have that conversation directly after a show.
Mhm.
A lot of people leave the show and then they go directly to another show. And
Mhm.
it's this schedule that's so compact and so overwhelming. And I mean, when you really boil it down, how are you how are you really paying attention to the collection if you have, you know, 5, 6, 7, 10 shows in one day?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like if they're able to somehow, lengthen that period of time or give more attention to each brand, then maybe they could have some sort of Q&A at the end of a show, or um, some other way that they can incorporate the audience, because the audience does have questions and they do want to understand, oh, why is Raf referencing this movie, or is he referencing this book versus this one? There's so many um, artistic elements that play a factor in the making of a product that people want to be educated.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting too, because I can see how fashion shows might get steered in the direction of sports, where, you have the game, you have the winner of the game, and then you have a press conference immediately after that interviews the players directly. I would
Yeah,
imagine that
absolutely.
this could kind of live in a similar way, where, Raf Simons does his collection, and then afterwards he holds a press conference where we have a feed of YouTube and Instagram and Twitter questions that come in. There are individuals who are hired on Raf's team that filter through those and consolidate and see which questions are the most pressing and then ask them to Raf. Like that would be an incredible moment, I think.
And
Um,
I think even taking that a step further, if you're able to include, our line of business, which is the models and the stylists, then you can have this kind of conversation that attacks it on, multiple angles. You have the designer, you have the model that's wearing the garments, you have the stylist that's putting those looks together. And if you have this conversation with a panel of all of them at once, then
mm,
you kind of have a better idea of, okay, this is the garment that I made, why I made it. This is the model that we chose, why did we choose them? This is the stylist, how does that play into, the overall story of the collection? How did we put the collection together? And essentially, how does it feel on body? Because
mm.
as the consumer, they're going to need to know, especially if they're not able to physically feel the garment, how does it lay on the body? How does it feel? What kind of energy does it resonate? Stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of different touch points, I think, post-production that the audience can have with these designers and the entire team behind them as well. I think that's extremely valid, which kind of goes into this next category of like, what is traditionally, kind of gained by seeing a fashion show not only in person, but now what's gained and also lost by watching fashion shows solely online. Again, there's a certain amount of seats that are available for these fashion shows in person, where they've dedicated them to industry insiders and influencers and people who will generate a significant amount of buzz, rather than, all of the amazing Joe Schmoes out there who are equally, if not more, enthusiastic about the collections, but are on the peripheral of the industry. So what are your thoughts, I guess, first and foremost, about the things that are lost and also gained by watching these shows just online?
Oh man, I mean, it's such an interesting thing to think about because when I first came into the industry, probably like what was it 2014, 2015.
Mhm.
You know, coming from Connecticut, I would take the train in to the city, and especially if it was during Fashion Week, I would get a couple friends together and we would sneak into the shows.
Yeah.
We would find ourselves a seat before it started, or figure out a way to get backstage, or see which one of our friends is interning what show, and try to find a way in. And that was such an exciting moment. As I kind of found myself within the industry, I was able to get these invitations, which was another milestone
Yeah.
in the process. And then as I was able to attend the shows, and work my way into the industry, I started to know these models and know these stylists and know these designers. So when I would see the collections come to life, understanding the progression from the opening look to the closing look, and
Mhm.
then seeing my friends walking those collections, or seeing my friends styling those runway shows. And I think when you have that kind of connection to the pieces that bring this all to life, then it's more exciting, and it is kind of like a sporting event. You want your favorite players to win, you want your favorite models to walk the show, you want your favorite stylist to work on the collection. You want the praise of that designer that you love to make the best it can be. And when you're at the show, you can see how the clothing drapes, and you can see how it relates to the music that's being played in the background, or the entire ambiance of the light show. And there's so many different factors that when you're there, it's a completely different experience. But as we keep comparing it to sports, there is a difference between being there and seeing it on TV. Maybe when you're there, you have this sort of emotional connection to it, right? But when you're seeing it on TV, you have multiple angles, and you have, kind of instant replay, and you can rewatch certain moments and see it from a perspective that maybe you wouldn't be able to see in a live situation.
Mm.
Um, and I think that idea of having like a press conference that you mentioned is like completely genius.
Mm.
To have this situation after the fact, where you can be like, okay, this is what I was thinking the whole time. So, I want to hear it directly from the source.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that also raises an interesting question too, where, recently the Maison Martin Margiela documentary came out, and it's interesting for a figure like that, and I know that he really is an outlier within the industry, but his whole business is built on the notion that he is the invisible man behind the magic. So having this kind of press conference component after a show, like, what about the designers who do want to wear a mask or not be recognized as their person with their collection, and not
Mm-hmm.
wanting to participate in that? That's another question that we can kind of turn over as well. How does that kind of impact this press conference function, or the accessibility to these designers? And I think historically as well, when we're talking about especially high fashion, the fact that it is a little bit unattainable, both in price point, but as well in like the message that's being delivered with the clothing, it's supposed to be idealized and romanticized and seem
Right.
like your best dreams come true. So when you kind of include this really transparent, open component of having a dialogue with the designers or with the team, you are also kind of opening the door for more things to accidentally slip out of someone's mouth, because we're all people, but also kind of losing that mystique, I think. So it's interesting to see how so much can be gained, but at the same time, there is a lot at risk when you're not able to experience it in person, like you were saying your experience has been.
Right, absolutely.
What's also interesting too is now with the rise of virtual technology and virtual reality, we're able to kind of experience a physical experience in a digital way that feels more authentic than just watching something on a flat screen. What are your thoughts on virtual reality? Because I know that Balmain was saying that they were going to explore that as an area of opportunity to showcase their collections with their audience, and it's kind of untapped.
So virtual reality is I think it's an inevitable sort of progress that we're going to have to get to eventually. But it definitely shakes things up a bit. Someone in the modeling industry where I am, it's definitely a threat. Because it takes away from the personality of real people. I mean, it's kind of like cashiers, right? When you have self checkout, there's
Yeah,
no longer a need for a cashier.
right.
You know what I mean? Of course, it's easier. It's more, you know, nobody bothers you. It's its own thing. But I'm wondering if VR will eventually, is that going to take over? Is that going to be the ultimate, um, you know, decision, I guess?
Hmm.
So I think, from our perspective, that's definitely something that is a threat to our industry. But with that being said, of course, it's opportunity as well.
Right.
And it's just another thing that I agree with the fashion industry. Whereas, when these hurdles come into play, we're very on the pulse and how to fix that and how to figure out what's to come next.
Mm.
And I'm not really sure where this VR is going to go. Um, and will it only be for a select audience? I'm not sure.
Right.
But we're already seeing it with, like, how we said before, IG Live, Facebook Live, um, YouTube, different platforms that majority of people already have,
Mhm.
and making that into something. But in terms of the VR technology, I'm not entirely sure where that's going to go.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. It kind of reminds me of the moment in Wall-E. I'm not sure if you can recall when you have all of these like really obese people and they're sitting in their chairs and
Hmm.
they're just like floating through space and they look at
Yeah.
the screens. Like I could imagine that that would be how people live in the future if, things don't go according to the better parts of humanity and that we need that human connection, like you were saying with, the self-checkout. Sure, it's convenient and you're able to kind of operate on your own terms and it allows for you to not be bothered by other people, but being
Right.
bothered by other people, like some positive experience might come out of it. There are times when maybe someone will come up and help me in that instance and then I have a really genuine connection with them. And I think given virtual reality and the farther away that we get from the physical experience, obviously that gap between people and that human touch grows as well.
Right.
And especially as it pertains to the modeling side within this experience, as we were saying, virtual reality, who knows where that's going to go. But in particular, when it comes to your role as an agent within, Wilhelmina or just in the modeling agency world, how do you feel the advancement of this technology and the digital creativity that is opening doors for models like little Michaela, who is, completely virtual? Where do you think there is opportunity for these virtual models to walk these fashion shows? And what does that really do to the beautiful faces that we know traditionally to be comprised within this fashion show component of the industry?
I mean, that's such a great question that you bring up. I mean, I think, we've had these kind of milestones in our industry, a couple of them already. We were talking about Margiela and how, before he had the income to pay for those talents, he would cover their faces, and because he wasn't able to pay for the
Mhm.
you know the usage of that.
Right,
And then, you know although you didn't have a face to the product, you were able to focus more on the actual garments.
right.
And I think, if you take something away, you're still going to gain something else out of it.
Right.
You know, um, if you take away the face and that means paying more attention to the garments, that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that if ultimately that were the situation where, you know, we have these animated characters, you know, somebody's going to have to develop that personality. Somebody's going to have to develop what that look is. Having that artificial personality, I don't know if that's necessarily the right direction,
Mm-hmm.
especially if we want to be more inclusive in terms of the looks, or, you know, the type of people that we cast and stuff like that. If we're generating these characters, is that helping or is that hurting?
Right.
You know, where is the kind of, where is the that real person that wants to be involved? I don't know.
Right.
um
No, that's so true. And I know that, technology in and of itself is a conversation to be had. And, it does pose as much an opportunity for the betterment of humanity as much as it does a detriment to the survival of our species. Basically, in that way that, if we are cutting out the human component of these experiences that still serve human beings, that's one step closer to kind of extinction in a way of, we start to see all of the creative things that are traditionally seen as fluff, like fashion, where it's not a need apart from just having something to clothe yourself with, but beyond that, it's all desire and kind of extra.
right.
But now it's like, if we're just constantly consuming those kinds of things and we don't have anyone to even physically show us what that's like, then it kind of even evolves a conversation like, what is the purpose of having more than one garment to wear in the first place? Like,
Hmm.
will this have opportunity to just be digital? Like, will we be creating avatars of our most idyllic selves and then buying products for them that way? What are your thoughts on, kind of virtual consumerism of fashion?
I mean, I'm right there with you on that. I think that if it continues to go in that way, what is the need to actually purchase these products? You know, why, if you can create if people are creating these platforms where everything's digital and you can have this avatar and you can kind of dress them with, you know, digital clothing, what's the point in having the clothing, right?
Right.
um and also you have people like, I mean, nothing against influencers, of course, that's a whole market in itself, but, you know, they are gifted these product, they wear it for a photo and then they return it. I mean,
Right.
how is that sustainable? What is that really doing? And what's the return on that? I'm not even sure, because that's not, you know, one of my expertise. But I mean, there's definitely a way to be more sustainable that can make the fashion industry more of an essential, you know, as you just said, it is not a need, it is a want.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we, as an industry, create ways to, you know, make ourselves more vocal in terms of social situations and, you know, I guess eventually, you know, political conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of the, I think it was the third conversation that Vogue had in this global conversation series, was what the future of e-commerce was, in which Virgil Abloh weighed in, kind of sharing that sentiment that, yeah, like the things that we produce are desire-based, they're not need-based. So we need to switch from being an industry of vanity to one that supports humanity. So we can talk about that another time. We don't have too much time left, so I just kind of want to dive into what you think the future of the fashion show calendar kind of looks like. It was also mentioned in this particular discussion with Vogue about potentially consolidating all of these fashion shows. Right now we have the major ones in London, New York, Milan, and Paris, but we also have incredible fashion shows in Asia, and Russia, and the Netherlands, and all of these
And
different.
Tbilisi, Georgia.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
and you have all of these incredible destinations that traditionally weren't thought of as being, the pinnacles of fashion innovation, but now they're showing that they can hold up and even innovate beyond some of these other major cities. Like New York's Fashion Week has declined so much within recent years, and you're having these smaller cities kind of come to the forefront and really show what they've got. So now that we're approaching the conversation of incorporating tech into these fashion show experiences, what do you think will happen with the fashion calendar? Do you think that fashion shows will be consolidated into a 1 month like Super Bowl experience where people can just tune into different fashion show games and get their fix that way?
That's such a great question. I think maybe that is where it's going to head. I think it should definitely be limited to kind of 2 seasons or two major fashion weeks, spring, summer, and then fall, winter. I think this whole pre-fall resort, like, I don't even know what that is, to be completely honest. Like, I don't know who's buying Louis Vuitton resort to go on the, cruise ship, whatever. But I think it's just a lot of, there's different ways where you can take a collection and make it last throughout a whole season. I don't think it's really necessary to have these pre-collections of, resort collections. I think it should just be, this story of fall, winter, or a story of spring, summer. And then, we can all pay attention to it more. It's like, by the time, so for those who don't know, fashion weeks are they're showing the collection that's a year ahead, right? Because we have the market weeks that follow after. They have to place their orders. It takes a whole year for that, collection to be made, and then to ultimately land into stores for you to purchase. Basically, the gist of it. If, as we were saying before, if we have this kind of model where, here's this spring, summer collection, so for example, spring, summer 21, right? Say in June of 2021, we show the collection that's going to be purchased at that time, this kind of see now, buy now situation, where it's, purchasable on the runway. Maybe that is the future. Because then you kind of cut out these fast fashion brands that ultimately take those collections before it's ever, purchased, and they, brands like Zara can make it in 2 weeks time.
Right.
Whereas this product's not even going to be in the stores until next year.
Right.
So, I mean, I'm not entirely sure how that process is going to happen, but I think this see now, buy now is probably going to be, what comes next.
Yeah.
And it's going to be smaller collections. And I think it should be more focused. Sometimes these collections have, 50 plus looks. And how can you even really pay attention to what the details are if you have 50 plus looks?
Right.
And when it goes to market, how much of that collection is actually being produced? I mean, I think it's roughly about maybe 30%, and its majority of it's, footwear and accessories. Whereas the garments don't even get to live in a situation, so if we really want to be more sustainable, then I think we should maybe edit a little bit better. Have these collections dialed down to more essential pieces, maybe more focused in terms of what it is that the designer wants to say to the consumer, and then maybe have the consumer decide what goes into stores. I really appreciate what buyers and merchandisers do, but I think that it needs that extra push from the consumer to really understand what will be bought.
Yeah, absolutely. And even to kind of piggyback on that, we could have these brands and these houses have, their essential collections where it's like, yeah, these are our signature looks. This is our signature t-shirt, the signature denim. You can get this every season, day in, day out. And then you have these fashion show moments that are just for spring, summer, and just for fall, winter, that are more focused and boiled down to just be what the designer's message that they want to say with that specific collection is, versus like
Right.
having to include the t-shirts, having to include the jeans. Like, we know that that's part of the brand. Like, let's just have them have the essence of the message of the season be delivered in the time of these fashion shows. So I think it could absolutely, as you said, kind of be merged together to have one mega viewing session where people could just see what the experience is virtually with all of these different designers from around the world, and also just be able to buy the necessities throughout, 365 days a year, but then participate in these kind of traditional trends that we see in the two large seasons, which is spring, summer, and fall, winter. And then with like these kind of pre-collections like pre-fall and resort, those traditionally have been mainly at the advantage of retailers, because when you have the spring, summer, and the fall, winter collections, like you said, it takes so long to manufacture these garments that the shipping window therefore is like quite long before you place the order and then you actually get it delivered to you in stores. And it's this whole hierarchy. It's really complex, but it doesn't need to be. And these pre-collections often serve as like a buffer in between when you get your fall winter collection, when you get your spring summer collection. So these stores are constantly having stock of a certain brand's, designs. So I think kind of rethinking the model of how fashion is delivered with the shows all the way boils down to how is this going to be delivered to consumers in store, and what is that going to be like? Is it going to continue to be brand to retailer, B2B, and then B2C, and from the retailer to the consumer? A lot of these brands nowadays are going straight from their business to the consumer, which is B2C, in terms of just selling their product directly to the end user. So I think a lot is going to have to be rethought, and this conversation about how the collections are being shown is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the changes that are going to be made kind of within the industry. But Bronson, we are running out of our free 40 minutes on Zoom. So I appreciate you so much for tuning in and weighing in and giving us your advice and expertise on this subject.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. And we look forward to having more conversations kind of coming on this channel and more very soon. So follow Bronson on Instagram. I'll go ahead and link all of his social channels down below, and we'll talk to you guys next time.